So give me just one moment, and that is exactly what we will do. Okay, so welcome guys. This is a webinar brought to you by Construction Robotics. Scott Peters is going to be the one facilitating today's presentation. I just get the pleasure of introducing who Construction Robotics is and getting to introduce Scott himself. For those that are not familiar, Construction Robotics is a world leader in robotics and automation equipment, really core focus on the construction industry. They have over a decade of delivering breakthrough innovations and have really led the way towards implementing realistic and practical paths towards the job site of the future, inclusive of really moving the industry to go bigger with the 32-inch block. We are patented proprietary lift assist technology. So today we are going to be talking about the ML150 or the MULE 150. Construction Robotics does also have the infamous SAM, semi-autonomous robot, as well as a newer MULE, which is the MZ100, which was a collaboration with JLG. And we did share space at ConExpo 2020 alongside JLG, which we're really proud to announce that as well. We are today going to be talking, as I mentioned, on the ML150. Scott Peters is going to run through the agenda, and what that really looks like is we're going to give anybody that does not have any familiarity on the MULE a quick overview. We kind of call it the brilliant at the basics. You're going to see the MULE and certain specs on the MULE and just become familiar with that particular product. And then we're going to dive into what a lot of you guys are wanting to talk about, which is social distancing. How can you leverage cobotics, potentially the ML150 on your site, either an active project today or bidding towards your future product line or project line. And then as well as our use cases. So how do I set this thing up? What are their varying setup types? And the attachments, also known as our grippers. So what types of materials can I hold? And then we will hear some feedback from industry thought leaders that have used the MULE on site and can speak to the ROI. So to go in more granular detail, here is Scott Peters. He is the CEO and co-founder of Construction Robotics.
Thank you, Taylor. All right. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. We're gonna jump right in and we'll give an overview of the MULE ML150. So I'll walk through some of the basics, and the MULE's been out there for a couple of years in the marketplace. The use cases, the accessories, the grippers have really evolved over the last couple of years. And so we'll get into some of the details of that, share some experiences, some pictures of the use of the MULEs on job sites, how it's being utilized into masonry, and really where it's starting to expand even beyond masonry. So again, really excited to have you join us today and have the opportunity to talk through the product. So let me jump right into the basics. So really what the MULE is designed to do is handle the weight of the material that it's lifting, allowing the worker to put their hands on the part itself. And this is an industry first. This is a type of machine that has historically, this technology has been utilized in other industries, but this is really a first for construction, where we can leverage this idea of cobotics or smart lifting in a way that allows workers to be more efficient and reduce injury and increase fatigue, and we'll talk more about that as well. But where smart lifting fits, so that you can kind of get your head wrapped around it, and the overall picture is when we lift on job sites, and so much of what we do on job sites is lifting and moving materials, right? And the traditional ways of doing that are your cranes, your forklifts, your telehandlers, the equipment that has large capacity. But most of that equipment does not really provide high levels of dexterity. In order to operate it, you need a crane operator, you need someone in the driver's seat of the telehandler or the lift, and you need someone potentially at the end of the hook, moving the product around, pushing it around, trying to get it into the final placement position. That can create unsafe conditions, and it can require multiple people to place certain materials or items on a construction site. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got things like exoskeletons and that type of technology, which is starting to come into the construction industry. And that technology is great in that it provides very high dexterity, but it typically is in a low weight range, right? So it'll handle balancing a couple pounds, 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds. It'll handle balancing that weight, but it's also really not typically designed for rapid loading and unloading, meaning like if you're gonna hold a weight out or hold a tool out, Exoskeletons can be great at supporting it or transferring the loads from, say, your shoulders to your hips or to your legs, therefore allowing you additional stamina and reducing the strain on the joints and muscles in your shoulders. However, it's still a weight that you have to carry, and it's still an impact that is applied to your body. So where smart lifting and the technology behind the Mule and where that fits in the overall picture in our mind is it is a technology that allows very high levels of dexterity. So equivalent to like what you'd find with an exoskeleton, because you can have your hands on the part itself, but it can handle much higher weights, and it's really designed for handling rapid loading and unloading, picking and moving apart quickly. And so with this idea that it can handle the larger weight, today the current Mule, the ML150 that we'll be talking about today, handles 150 pounds. But as we move down the road, we will have versions of the Mule that will handle lower weights and be smaller and lighter, more compact, such as the MZ100, which will handle 100 pounds, and other technologies, products, and Mule offerings in the future that will handle greater capacities in the 500, even up to 1,000-pound range. So, that technology is out there. It's coming soon, and that's really where the smart lifting assist space, I think, is really valuable. Is that when you're in that mid weight range, or that kind of something that people would handle, that people on job sites would handle today with 1, 2, or sometimes 3 workers to move and place a product, but it has a physical impact on their body. That's where smart lifting can have a huge benefit. And we'll talk about that. So where do those benefits lie? It comes down to productivity, ergonomics, and then really helping with the workforce. So to touch on each of these, from a productivity standpoint, you can increase your productivity by utilizing the Mule, in this case, because it reduces the physical strain on the body. And therefore, someone who may lay, if they lay 150 blocks in a day, they may lay 120 of those before lunch, and then in the afternoon, oftentimes they're fatigued, or their body is worn down, and so it can take a toll, and the number of blocks that they lay towards the end of the day can be reduced. In addition, when they're laying heavier and heavier blocks, or they're laying up over rebar, or having to move and place blocks into awkward positions, tight spaces, that can add additional strain to someone's shoulders, to their back, and cause additional fatigue. Well, as fatigue sets in, quality reduces. Your body gets tired, your mind gets tired, and therefore it can have an impact on quality. It can have an impact on safety, and it can really, obviously, the direct impact is the reduced productivity. So by taking that fatigue off the table, productivity can absolutely increase. Not to mention, as we move to larger materials, which we'll talk about later, the bigger the material you place, the more square footage you can install on the wall. And you can see in the pictures there, they're moving 32-inch block around. From an ergonomic standpoint, obviously, along with the productivity and the fatigue there, ergonomics are the big piece where we can reduce the injury, really the chances for someone to get hurt when lifting and placing materials. In fact, we've been on job sites where we've had construction workers, masons, who are later in their career, who no longer lay block on job sites because they physically can't do it for more than 1 or 2 days in a row, or they have to rest after laying a couple days of larger 12-inch block, where they've utilized the Mule and they've been able to achieve high levels of productivity, just like they did when they were in their 20s and 30s. So that type of ergonomic benefit and the opportunity there to help really people extend their careers is absolutely been seen and recognized on jobs, and we believe that it can be utilized in more and more cases. And so that really ties right into the workforce, right? I think many construction companies see the labor challenges, and where Mule can help is that it can extend the life or extend the careers of the workers that are out there, as in the examples that I just talked about, but it can also attract new people in the industry. Masonry is a very demanding trade, and construction is very demanding as well when you're out there laboring or working to install materials, whether it is masonry or concrete or really one of the other trades. It's physically demanding, and many times I've heard masons refer to their job as trading their bodies for a paycheck. And so that type of demand takes a toll over a day, a week, a month, a career. And so attracting new people in the industry, I think it's great to want to work hard, but I think by leveraging technology like the Mule, like collaborative robotics, we can work smarter along with harder, and really attract new people into the trade, maybe that aren't built as strong to handle like a 12-inch block and place it over rebar, but they might have the skill and the ability to be a mason. And the mule can kind of level the playing field and open up a lot of opportunities. So some really unique aspects of what the mule can bring to the table, and we're excited to see the growth and the progress in the industry as we move forward. So now I'm going to dive into really some of the details behind the mule for those of you less familiar who haven't used mules or haven't seen them in person. And so I'll touch on some of the different componentry of the mule. This is kind of the overview, and we'll hit on each of these individually as we walk through. So the mule is made up of an arm. You have, in this case, we have a 12-foot arm on the mule. It's two 6-foot sections, and that allows you to work in about a 24-foot workspace. So when you set up a mule, typically it's set on a scaffold or on the ground. And in that given workspace, you'll be able to lay out 20 to 22, 24 feet of wall in that space. So oftentimes in masonry, allowing you to work control joint to control joint from a single mule setup. The arm also has covers on it to provide weather protection for the wire rope and the cable there, and extend the life of the wire rope. We also have a controller. So at the end of the arm, you've got this controller, which you see the red box in the upper right. And that controller is really the interaction for the worker. So that's where the worker can adjust the speed, turn on float mode, which allows them to put their hands on the product itself, set the auto retract height. So when they place a block, the mule will automatically retract up out of the controller, will automatically retract up out of the way so that they can work on the wall. It allows them to quickly and easily set that height and interact with it. And of course, it has an e-stop for safety reasons, and other functionality is built into that. But at the bottom of that controller is also where you have quick attachments. So you can see here, there's a block gripper on there, and you'll see more about grippers as we progress through the presentation. But on the bottom of this handle here, you can see is where you add different grippers and accessories. Very easy to swap them out, pull a pin, disconnect an air hose or a data cable in some cases, connect in your new gripper, and you're off to the races. You can use the mule for other things beyond just that specific block or even masonry in general. It has fork pockets at the bottom of the mule. So these fork pockets allow you to pick from either direction. And you think of the mule components as almost like Lego pieces, right? So they can be reconfigured and they're interchangeable with different parts and pieces. You'll see various pictures throughout this presentation of those fork pockets also utilized as a base when mounted to a scaffold. So they may be relocated to the bottom of a stack so that you have the fork pockets on the bottom, a mast on top, and then the mule on top of that. You'll see some of that as we move around. But that is a stable base that allows you to set the mule on the ground in that configuration that you see in the picture, or pick it up and mount it on top of a ground setup. So you can see here in the picture, we also have masts that come with the standard package of the mule, and you can get additional masts to allow you to work up to 22 feet freestanding with these masts. There's also the ability to tie those masts into walls. And we have mast adapters for many of the mast climbing work platforms, allowing you to couple a mule to the top of a mast itself. Very quick and easy to move these masts or disconnect these mast sections for bolts. Pretty easy. Comes with standard 2.5 to 5 foot lengths, but additional lengths are available as well. And then on the bottom of the stack here is the pallet base, and the pallet base has 4 outriggers on it with leveling feet. There are level indicators on the mule itself, so as you set it up and level it, you crank the leveling feet and you can see how the mule is level up top. It can compact down and fit through a doorway, and it is movable with a pallet jack, or as you'll see here in the next picture, it integrates with a wheeled cart as well, so it can directly couple and pin into the wheel cart, allowing you to manually move that mule around, say, a concrete pad when you're building up the exterior walls of your building. You'll see in some of the pictures there. So we're going to dig into some of the use cases now. We'll talk about the attachments of the mule and really spend some time showing some pictures of how the mule is utilized on job sites. Okay, so the first couple pictures in the upper left here, we've got a number of accessories that, like I said, attach to the bottom of the controller, and more are coming online. We also do custom accessories based on the need of the contractor. So in many cases, contractors can submit a request to us. We can provide pricing to engineer a new gripper that's custom for an application. And then that allows them to utilize the mule in many other cases. And of course, there's new grippers coming online pretty regularly, and so as we try to, we'll continue to communicate that to the broader market. But if you have mules, then it's always good to keep an eye on what grippers are available, which may expand the opportunity to utilize your mule in more and more places. So in the upper left, you've got some pictures of a couple grippers that we have that have been used for retaining wall block or even Insultech block. So this is an offset plate that goes with a standard block gripper, and this offset plate, it allows you to adjust the location where you're picking block that is offset from the balance point of the block. So in this case, these are 130-pound Keystone retaining wall block that were picked in place with the mule. The location where they picked it was back a little bit from the center of mass. So with an offset plate, they were able to balance the block, and one man was able to lift in place quite a few of these within a given day, significantly increasing the productivity on this project where beyond what they had originally estimated. Another gripper that we have is really what we call a configurable gripper, which is a very dynamic adjustable gripper. You can adjust the balance point, you can adjust the pins in the back, allowing you to pick a lot of versatile materials. It has a cam in the front that locks into the material along that front face. We've used it for retaining wall, we've used it for specialty block. It's a very flexible, adjustable gripper that is available. Next one here is our stone veneer gripper. And this has some really unique and interesting features. Really designed to place stone or precast pieces on a building. The pieces you see here in the picture are about 100-pound pieces that one man is picking and placing. And it really goes, and in this project in particular, it went from what was a two-man lift, where two men were lifting and placing these stone pieces into the wall, to a one-man lift. And so you could spread out your team, utilize your team more effectively across a wider portion of the project. And of course, in a time of social distancing, it allows for greater space between the workers and reduces the team lift. And we'll touch more on that here as we progress as well. But on the stone gripper, you have narrow fingers in the back with a knurled face to grab the back of the stone. But on the front face, you have, not quite pictured here, but you have a protective rubber coating on the cam that allows you to not damage the front of the face while you pick and place the block. In addition, if your stone or your block have pinholes or the ability to have pinholes, we do have standard pin grippers. This one was designed specifically for this block, but it's pretty easy to have additional sizes available based on the pins in the stone that you are picking in place. Again, back to the CMU gripper, you can see this is our standard CMU gripper. It does have two cams, which allow it to safely grab the block. So in the case where the system was to power down in mid-cycle for whatever reason, your generator dies, something happens, the block will still remain in the grippers or in the jaws there, because gravity will hold it in place. So gravity and the cams coupled together will hold it in place. But again, you can see here is a great example of how the mason is able to put their hands on the block while placing it. We also have additional accessories such as this extension bar for utilizing two CMU grippers. So in the case of a open center web block where you have two outside webs, you can utilize this double gripper. There's many other applications where this type of configuration can be useful as well. Whether it's grabbing a large thin concrete panel or something like that. In addition, a new fairly recent product that we've launched is an adjustable pin gripper. So this one will adjust from being able to grab block from about 8 to 14 inches wide. And so in here, you can either use it in a pin configuration, so you can utilize the pins inside pinholes. You can utilize the pins around the outside of the block, as in this picture, with a little spacer in here that can essentially retain the block from moving. So this is an example, a real life example that has been utilized where this gripper will lift in places, lift and move this retaining wall block. And then it also has these additional pads on it, which have been utilized or are being utilized to place a stone. So like a wide flat stone, 8, 9, 10 inch wide flat stone. And this type of gripper is ideal for those type of applications. We also have a hook, which provides versatility. You can add it right to the bottom, plug and play just like every other gripper. And that hook, again, allows you to strap stone or strap other materials as you move it around. And then other accessories that we have cable extensions. You'll see some in the pictures as we progress through the use cases, where you can actually have the mule set up quite a bit further above your workspace and utilize a cable extension to operate in your workspace. The mule itself has 11 feet of travel, so the controller will travel up to 11 feet up and down within a given setup. But again, in a scenario where you want to work 20 feet or 30 feet below the mule, you can do that by adding cable extensions in place. And then we have vacuum grippers, in this case, using vacuum to pick refractory brick. So the vacuum gripper scenarios can be utilized for various applications as well. And I think again, the final grippers to cover, we have, beyond masonry, we've started to really identify opportunities in other trades. And one in particular where contractors have utilized the mules is for placing form panels. So you can see here there's a Siemens form panel. When you get into the 6 and 8 foot Siemens form panels, they can be up to 100 pounds, 80 to 100 pounds. A great application where it's something that a man can handle, but when doing it quickly and repetitively throughout a day, it can be awkward and it can cause injury, especially when moving them from on top of a trench down into a hole to set a foundation form or set forms for a foundation. It's a great opportunity where setting the mule up there or leveraging the mule on top of a telehandler or off the forks of a telehandler, you can safely move and place materials pretty rapidly. We have extensions, button box extensions that can be utilized and added to a mule. You can see here's a button box extension on this gripper itself. And then we also have rebar extensions. So when working in tight rebar spaces, we have extensions that allow you to get the controller up farther out of the way so that you can create space between where your block is placed and where the controller and the cabling may interfere with rebar. So now we'll jump through some of the use cases, and then we'll close out with some discussion around social distancing, some best practices, and some other topics that we'll cover here. So we'll talk about crank up, we'll talk about freestanding applications, uses of mule on mast climbing work platforms, and mules on frame and pipe scaffolding. So from a crank up scenario, oftentimes mules are, there's various ways where mules are utilized on crank up. One example is where the whole mule setup is placed right up on the crank up itself, where you have the mule with the outriggers and the fork base set right on there. You can see in these pictures up here, it is placed right up on the deck and spaced out typically about 20 to 24 feet, depending on the length of the block that they're laying, as well as kind of other obstructions in the wall. But that's the typical setup that you would operate. Of course, in these scenarios, you need to be aware of where your mast locations are to make sure you're able to have the mule work and utilize around the mast. So in this case, they were able to set it up so that it could basically bend and curl around the mast, but giving them the ability to pick the blocks off the plank, or excuse me, off the deck, and then place them in the wall. So again, some additional pictures of mules on crank up. But other options, so when working off of crank up, other options are, of course, you can freestand your mules. So in this picture, another area of this project, they were able to set up mules freestanding with multiple mast sections. They were able to put them about 20 feet in the air freestanding, working off of a concrete pad, leveling them up. And that allowed them to keep the deck space free when they were working off of the crank up in this case, and load up more materials onto the crank up scaffolding and keep the mules separated. In addition, you can see here is a great picture of the wheelbase that integrates with the mule. And in this case, when you're working off a nice concrete pad, laying out your initial walls, working around the job, to have the mule in this type of scenario, it allows you to quickly lay up your walls, move the cart down, set it up quickly again, and get moving again. Here's some additional freestanding pictures. Again, you can pick this whole setup out of the fork pockets here. So this telehandler reaching over the wall to pick that whole setup and move it back out of the way is definitely a possibility. In this picture over here, they were able to actually freestand a mule and then build the frame scaffolding around it, allowing them to have some additional, flexibility of, when they wanted to move the mule, they could remove some of the walk plank and move the mule out of the way. A common setup that we see mules utilized on is a mast climbing work platform. And in this case, this is where you can use different configurations of the mule. So you'll see in some of the pictures here, the pallet base, or the fork base, that's typically right under the mule, can be utilized right on the deck of the mast climber and work platform. So in this case, they put the fork pockets down, they have deck straps that tie it in, and then of course put the mast on top with the mule on top of that. And in these cases, you can use various mast configurations as well, depending on how high you're working relative to the location of the mule. So in this case, they had the mules right up on the deck of the scaffold, and they were laying out the groundwork initially with the scaffold already in place, giving them flexibility to use the mules, but essentially working off the ground right behind it. And then as soon as they get up to shoulder height or head height, they can move to the scaffold and pick up right from there as they're already set up and ready to go. Additional setups, as we talked about earlier. So this is an example of a mule working on a top of a mast climbing work platform tower on an elevator shaft, where they're able to utilize the mule to work all the way around. And in this case, you can see they set the mule quite a bit higher than the workspace of the masons, and they used cable extensions to have the controller and the mule in an accessible place for the mason, but all of the other pieces were high and out of the way. And in this case, ran the power cable from the mule down here to run a generator, and they just plug it in at the start of the day, and they're off to the races. And you can see here's a quick picture of the deck straps, very, very simple deck straps that basically wrap around the deck, slide in, and pin in place. And we have front and back of the deck straps, and I think we'll cover that more here in a minute, that allow you to tighten those in place. Obviously, there's been other scenarios where you could utilize the pallet base up on the mast climbing work platform. Just really, it's a weight consideration of how you want to utilize it. Another way that you can utilize the fork pockets that has been a best practice more recently is to have a set of fork pockets up top under the mule, as well as down below on the deck. You can't see it in this picture, but if you have fork pockets on the deck with it strapped in place and fork pockets up above, you can have a mast section in between here that allows you to pick and move that mule easily, as opposed to having to sling it from the top. You can pick it right from the fork pockets and leave the attachment to the mast climber in place, allowing you to quickly move mules from one location to another. We do work with all of the major mast climbing work platform companies here in the US, and as well as more coming online soon. So some additional pictures of how our customers have utilized Mule for with say frame and pipe scaffolding. You saw one earlier where they had a freestanding mule with a pipe around it. This is another example of a setup where this contractor actually came up with their own setup to utilize a mule on these planking, which then attached to their frame scaffolding. So in this case, they were able to kind of engineer their own system that allowed them to work on that frame scaffolding. Here's some additional pictures where they have a full setup of a mule with a pallet base working off the frame scaffolding. And in many cases, we'll work with our contractors or our dealers to really help evaluate and come up with solutions for how to utilize the mule for your job site. So we have a special implementation team, work very closely with our dealers to make sure that if we have to help engineer a solution and even partner with a mast climbing work platform manufacturer or a frame scaffolding manufacturer, we're happy to do that to provide an engineered solution for your job site to give you flexibility. Our belief is that we want to be able to use mules wherever you've got people deployed on a construction site. So from a customization standpoint, we, as I mentioned, we do customizations. We can also partner with contractors who do some of their own work. And here's a couple of pictures. One in the upper left where the contractor utilized the mule on a telehandler. So we made sure we were safe and followed the rules, and they utilized the mule to place concrete form panels, or in this case, strip them back off the wall once the wall was poured. And then we have worked with other contractors that have devised things such as rail systems. So there's a picture of a rail system in action where they have mules up on a rail system and allows those mules to travel back and forth across longer distances, which was really a specialized setup for their application that worked well for them. So again, we're here to help find the best solution for our customers to make sure that you can utilize the mules in the best way possible and really increase the productivity and the use of those mules on job sites. So setup is fairly straightforward. When it shows up on your job site, oftentimes you have the pallet base with the two masts and the mule configured for shipping. To really reconfigure it, it's a matter of, again, everything is 4 bolts, so four simple bolts to disconnect the components. You can then take the mule, add the mast to it, and then attach it to the pallet base if you're going to be using it in a ground configuration. At that point, you can level up the mule. There's level indicators right on the mule. Plug it in. The unit powers on in a matter of a couple minutes. And the first time you pick a block, you come down, you press the button, it grabs the block. You'll hit the calibrate button, which lifts the controller up, holds the block up, weighs the block. Takes about 1 or 2 seconds to weigh the block. Once it does that, your hands can be on that block and ready for operation and use. So I mentioned this earlier, and I want to touch on this a little bit further, which is the idea of oversized material and oversized block. So a couple years ago, when we started with the mule, I think we started to work with the masonry industry, work with a number of manufacturers, because our belief is that now that we have technology that can allow masons to have their hands in the block and precisely move and place materials on a job site as if they normally would, but the mule handles all the weight, it presents a unique and interesting and exciting opportunity to increase the size of the material that we place. And the advantage there is that now you can double the square foot every time you move a unit to the wall. So if we can handle up to 100 or 150 pounds, if the unit that we install on the wall is 2 or even in some cases, 2 to 3x bigger, then the I think it's obviously the amount of productivity you can gain is dramatic. And so we worked with a number of manufacturers. We've got quite a few manufacturers around the country that are now producing 32-inch block. We've got quite a few more that will be coming online this year as well. So the first one that came out was the 8832. So essentially 2 8816s together, and they do make them with a strike in the middle so that it looks like 2 8816s, or they make them without the strike so that it looks like a longer aspect ratio block. And you can interchange, on a job site, if you're installing materials, you can interchange 8816s and 8832s in a way that when you're running your long runs, you're using 8832s and mules. When you're doing your detailed, intricate work with a lot of corners and cuts, you might go back to 8816s and lay it by hand. But it allows you that flexibility to really optimize the material for your job site successfully. In addition, we've worked with a contractor and a manufacturer in the Midwest, and the first 12 by 32-inch block are now being produced and will be on job sites here in the next week or two. And quite a few of those will be installed over the coming months utilizing mules. And we are incredibly excited to be part of the experience with the contractor. They're incredibly excited to be using the 12 832s as they had a lot of success with 12 816 blocks, a regular 12-inch block. With the mules, a lot of success with that in the past, and now they're doing very similar jobs again with a double long block. So I think excited to see the results and what comes of that experience there. So social distancing. Let's jump into social distancing. Obviously, very very timely given the world that we're living in nowadays, and I think it's been a dramatic change over the last couple of months. Understanding kind of the new way that we'll be working as a society, as an industry. Obviously going through a lot of changes. There's been many impacts throughout the industry where construction projects have stopped, have been delayed, have kind of been put on hold and restarted and put on hold and restarted. And we've seen that personally firsthand in our region. And now I think we've worked through a lot of this. And I believe that a number of construction projects and areas are starting to open back up for construction. But with the reopening of construction also is going to come new requirements. So CDC has put out the requirement of keeping 6 feet of distance, so social distancing and wearing masks, and a number of other requirements that are put on people in general. And the industry itself has put out some of the guidelines that you see here, where on construction sites, it's important that general contractors, subcontractors really start to schedule their work appropriately, to really be thoughtful and mindful about how they deploy the people, to not put people in additional harm's way, to make sure that they have the ability to have proper distances from each other, and that they can be respectful of really reducing the potential for the spread of COVID-19 on these construction sites, where there is in many cases a lot of workers working in close quarters. So scheduling work carefully, minimizing the number of workers in work group teams to complete tasks. Really, when you set up and work on your workspaces, making sure that you're managing high traffic areas, and staggering things like lunch breaks and start times and finish times, so everyone doesn't end up gathering in a common location. Obviously, this will, of course, increase the need for communication with your teams in different ways than maybe what we're used to in the past. And in a large part, projects will where they have to have a lot of workers, need to be managed appropriately, so that the construction site can best follow the rules as possible. And of course, introducing things like robotics and other methods and techniques that can take a job that was historically a two-man lift or a two-man place, whether that's a 12-inch block, and thinking, or a larger unit, a large piece of stone, and utilizing technology like the mules, you can now have the advantage of having one worker installing that material by himself, allowing to have safe social distancing from other workers on the job site. And not only that, but you have the other benefits of the mule that we've talked about, where it can reduce the fatigue of the worker, you can increase productivity of the worker, and really see a benefit and take advantage of the fact that we have to manage to these new guidelines on construction sites. We believe that the mule and a lot of the technology that we can provide really can help with that transition and provide benefits in a time where we have increased regulations and increased rules that we need to be mindful of. So we'll talk about some of the best practices here for a couple minutes, and then open it up for Q&A in the last 10 minutes or so. Some of the best practices that we've seen out there in construction sites, and I guess let me take a step back and talk about implementation in general. So part of what we do with construction robotics, part of what we want to help our partner with our contractors on, and with our dealers throughout the country and world is working closely together to help provide the best solution for the contractor. So in many cases, we'll bring to the table the training, the expertise, in conjunction with our dealer, the training, the expertise, and the knowledge of how the machine works, how the technology works. But really, to get the greatest benefit out of the technology, the contractor ultimately kind of has the other piece of the puzzle, right? The contractor understands their team, they understand their job, and they understand how to best deploy that technology to get the most out of it from their team. But it is a collaborative effort. So we have a great implementation team that really understands construction and understands the technology, and can come out and work very closely with crews to get buy-in early on a project, and to ensure that the project is laid out. When you implement new technology, whether it's SAM or Mule or really any new technology, even iPads on a job site, it's really important to get buy-in and training early on in that process. So making sure that the people on the job site understand why this is there for them, and why this can be a benefit to their body, to their backs, to their shoulders, so that they feel good at the end of the day, so that they can extend their career and not get injured and be out of work for that injury. So once they understand that benefit, they understand that it's not a threat, but it can be a huge advantage when utilized appropriately, and they buy into that. That's where you get the greatest success. When the team is working together, when they really are bought into the overall concept, and working closely with the foreman and the site team to make sure that the mules are set up appropriately, that they're moved quickly and efficiently on the job site, and that the team material flows are really staged in a way that allows them to take advantage of that material. It's similar when you set up a manufacturing process. You typically go through a whole planning process where you'll think about material flow. You'll think about the movement of the people in that manufacturing facility, the movement of materials, how you need to stage it, how it comes into the facility, how it leaves the facility. To optimize, reduce the number of steps, reduce the number of motions, and optimize the overall workflow experience. In many cases, construction companies, masonry contractors, they're doing this on a daily basis, whether they realize it or not. They're doing that as part of their job, but there's always best practices and opportunities to think differently, especially when implementing new technology and new equipment. It's important to take a step back, plan, think, and then execute accordingly. So our team can help with that. Our dealers can help with that. And that's a big part of the overall solution that we provide. So a couple of best practices that we'll just touch on here quickly. The man-to-mule strategy is one that I think we have a number of best practices that we've observed and documented, and we're happy to share and walk through. Different contractors will experience different success with different strategies, but we've been on projects where we've had 2 and 3 contractors working, or excuse me, 2 and 3 masons working together with a mule. So in some cases, one mason may be mortaring the wall, one mason may be placing the block, and then a laborer may be picking and moving the block, or kind of loading the mule with the block and handing it to the mason. So in that case, that 3-man team can be incredibly fast at moving and placing block on that wall, but it does require 3 men working in a closed space with a mule. But they can also install hundreds of block in a day, or even potentially more, move very quickly. So that's one strategy. Another one is where you might have 2 men on a mule. So a laborer loading the mule, handing the block, or floating the block to the mason, who's then installing it. And at that point, they're using, they're mortaring and installing the block and finishing the wall. And then, of course, there's a third method where you have a single mule or single man on a mule, where he's able to pick off the pallet itself and place on the wall. And there's a couple other scenarios that I'll touch on in the next slides, but just to point out a couple pictures, you can see here in this scenario off of a mass climbing work platform, the mason is working from the drop plank, which makes it a little bit harder to pick off of the pallet itself because of the height of the pallet. In this case over here, they're working with a flat plank where the plank is set up equal to the deck height, allowing it a little bit easier to pick off the pallet of block. But in both cases here, you can see they've staged their material in a way that comes from the manufacturer and is set right up on the scaffold, which reduces the amount of labor required to restage all that block. So material flow is another piece that's really important to think about. Where the material gets set, how it comes into the job, and how many hands are touching it in the process of installing it in the wall. And we believe with the mule and proper planning, you can reduce the amount of hands that need to touch that block and reduce the amount of staging. So therefore, you can get great efficiency without all the additional handling. Block orientation is another thing. Many times, a block manufacturer will ship block on its side or upside down relative to how it's placed. In that case, it requires additional handling to make it ready to place in the wall. So it's important to work with your block manufacturer to ensure that it comes in an orientation that allows you to pick it and place it in the wall quickly. You can see here in this picture, that block comes in a way that you bring the mule gripper down, grab that block, and it goes straight in the wall without additional handling. You can see in this case over here, this mason is actually flipping that block. In that case, working with the manufacturer to ensure that the material comes in the right way the first time will be well worth it in the long run. The attachment strategy, so again, how you attach the mule, whether you attach it to the mast, whether you attach it to the deck, is an important consideration when looking at your overall workflow. And that's something where, similar to how mason contractors will do scaffold plans on their projects, we can be part of that scaffold plan, whether we kind of interact directly with the scaffold planning strategy or come in after the scaffold plan is developed. We're happy to develop a mule plan in addition to a scaffold plan. Site setup and scaffold setup, so similar approaches, making sure that you know where your mules are going to jump to. So oftentimes when masons are laying up a wall, you'll lay up a few feet, you'll need to move to a new location, lay up a few more feet while you're grouting other parts of the job. And therefore, really thinking about the setup of how you have your mules, how quickly you're going to move those mules, and if you have them in multiple locations, or really kind of your strategy about the mule interaction is an important piece. Training checklist and change management. So again, when we show up on the job site for the first time, and when the technology and the mules show up, we want to make sure that we have strong buy-in from the team, that they understand why the mules are there, that they're there to help them, help their backs and bodies and shoulders, and really make them comfortable with the technology, so it's not intimidating for them. They understand that they can learn this technology very easily, very quickly, no matter how much they like to tell you that old dogs don't like to learn new tricks. I think that once they get comfortable with it and they can see that they can get the same level of work done in a day or more and going home at the end of the day feeling great, I think it's a big win when you see the light bulb go off in their head and they have that experience themselves. And then so we go through training. Our dealers are trained to train the masons on the job site, and also to work with the team from a change management and a planning standpoint. And then of course, the field release strategy, toolbox talks, and really defining success metrics. So these are key aspects of how we implement mules, making sure that we're having regular communication and touch points with the masons in the field, with the foremen, the superintendents, to make sure that we understand what the metrics are, what the success is, and having those regular toolbox talks about best practices of how to utilize the mules, and maybe some of the techniques that others have learned on job sites as a team is deploying the mules. So, one technique that a mason may learn may be useful for everyone else. And a lot of times the difference between really success and mediocre implementation of a mule is kind of that communication and the sharing of the best practices on how to get comfortable with the mule for that team. So again, a couple more pictures just to share, and you can see here they're installing 32-inch block in this picture here. And obviously a great opportunity when you're installing the larger materials with a mule, able to pick right off a pallet, place that 32-inch block in the wall, and maintain safe social distancing from each other. Another great picture here where they're able to install the 32-inch block, again, straight off the pallet. You can see over in this picture here, again, how they stage those materials. And in this case, they have, their bomb beam block on the scaffold and the 32-inch block in another area of the scaffold. So some great pictures and information there. So last couple slides, and I'll wrap up and open it up for Q&A at the end. So industry feedback, I think, in case studies. So we always try to make sure we're listening to our customers, listening to the industry. The mule has evolved, our techniques have evolved, our deployment and strategy of engagement, getting good engagement and getting good success have evolved. And really a lot of that is owed to the feedback from our dealers and the feedback from our masons and customers who have mules and who have successfully deployed mules, around the country. And so we've got a couple of case studies that we publish online, and we're happy to share if you're unable to find them. But there's a project you saw in a number of the pictures here. There's a project out in North Chicago where we worked with Jimmy Z Masonry on a project with Clark Construction and Blinderman Construction to build a Navy a facility at the Navy Station Great Lakes. A housing project, and this is where they installed a great number of 32-inch blocks. So they were able to value engineer the building from a 16-inch block to a 32-inch block. The masons felt great at the end of the day. They were able to utilize the mule to install those block, and well over it received great increases in productivity. So over 2x production increase on the project, and I think learned a lot along the way, but ultimately, I think we saw some great value and really understood how to successfully deploy those mules on that project. So some great learnings and great experiences, and we got some great videos online of that project. Another project, which was a fun little case study for us, a contractor out of Central New York, DePeso Masonry, owns and utilizes mules. And one of my experiences personally working with the gentleman in the photo there. When I first showed up to the job site, he was incredibly skeptical of the mules. I think a typical construction mindset where there's resistance to new technology. The feeling is it's not necessary. It's not something that they want to try to learn new. However, after working with him for a few days, and you can see in some of the videos posted online, after working with him for a few days, and once he understood the potential of what the mule can bring to the table, the impact on his body that it can save, as well as the potential of what it can do to their overall project schedule and success, I think he became a believer and an advocate. And it was exciting to see that transition in his mindset and his attitude. And they saw over a 27% increase on that project, ultimately helping schedule. And I think are excited about how they can continue to deploy mules going forward in the future. So we'll open it up for questions. We've got about 10 minutes left, and Taylor, feel free to jump in if you've got additional items you want to cover or talk about here with the Q&A.
Okay, awesome. So we already have a couple of questions. Just so you guys know, you can go ahead and type your question in the Q&A section of the box, and we're going to answer it that way because we do have over 20 people on the call. So everybody hopping in there wouldn't be that effective. So we'll go ahead and start off with Ryan's question. Scott, Ryan is asking, can a mule be used with a bobcat with a fork attachment?
So yes, there are certain procedures that we can walk through to make sure that it's done safely and effectively. but yes, absolutely. You can see in the one picture here, we have utilized the mule off of a telehandler. Obviously, power requirements and how we make sure that the mule does run off a generator, and so making sure that we have the proper power requirements handled so that we don't have cord issues, as well as proper locking and attachment back to the Bobcat. So yeah, we can share some of the details behind how to do that successfully, but absolutely.
Okay, and then we have one from Mark. He says, Scott, I'd like to have you elaborate on specific instances of where customers' productivity gains. So example is % increase in production and output, and what results has CR's productivity studies showed, i.e. the side-by-side block building video.
Yeah, sure. And there's a number of great videos online that you can always check out as well. Either through our website, www.robotics.build, or through our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and look for Construction Robotics, there's some great case studies that are shared by customers. We have a customer in Arizona, Antonio Vila, who owns mules, operates them on a regular basis, and has shared some great case studies and examples himself. He personally has seen strong productivity gains, where by deploying mules and proper workflow management and proper setup on scaffolds, he's able to get well over a 2-3x productivity increase on his projects when utilizing mule. We've also been on projects, and covered a couple in the case studies there where they saw anywhere between say a 30% or 27% increase in productivity on the Peso project, or a 2x productivity on the Jimmy Z project. Those are another couple of great examples where productivity increases do occur. Many jobs, there's some interesting and very different dynamics that occur. We've been on elevator shaft projects where a 12-inch block, a team was installing 12-inch block and they saw a 50% increase in productivity by utilizing mules. Again, because the team, in a couple points they made, which was really interesting, was that the team saw about a 20 to 30% increase in productivity when utilizing mules in just their normal laying process. But one area they actually gained on the overall project was when they hit the areas where they had to do grouting and they were hand grouting on that project. The men were actually fresher. They felt better. They weren't as fatigued when they hit that point in the wall. And so therefore their grouting speeds were actually much faster grouting when they had the mule. Even though they were grouting by hand, they were able to get the grouting done faster, which helped the overall project schedule and helped the overall productivity because they were able to lay block longer throughout the day on that project. So there's a couple examples. Happy to get into more, but obviously some best practices to achieve great productivity, just to kind of sum it up. Number one, larger materials. It's a no-brainer. You can have huge productivity gains when you use larger materials. Proper setup of the mules, making sure that they're in the right locations and that your team understands them. Training is a huge piece, and then setting those expectations and the guidelines for your team around how they can continue to utilize the mules to feel good. And then I guess the last piece just to point out is I talked a little bit about 1-man, 2-man, 3-man teams. Different projects require different approaches, and so I would encourage you to try those different 1, 2, 3-man teams, because in some cases a 2 or 3-man team may be a more successful approach to really get 2 or 3x productivity gains.
Great. I know that we have a few attendees on the line that are more comfortable speaking in Spanish. So we do have a Spanish translator on the line. So Ignacio, if you would like to ask any questions, if Daniel, you can also request this, or anybody else, we do have an English-Spanish translator on the line.
¿Cómo está, Ignacio? ¿Tiene alguna pregunta?
Oh, I have to allow him to talk.
Oh.
I just did.
Ignacio, ¿estás ahí?
Might not be working.
Hello, Ignacio.
I'm not sure. I feel like I hear a muffle, but I'm not sure. So Daniel, will you just let Ignacio know that we can answer any of his questions post-call?
Ignacio, si me estás escuchando, te podemos llamar cuando termine la llamada.
Sí, cómo no.
Ah,
sí,
¿sí me
Daniel.
escucha? Perfecto.
Sí,
¿Tiene alguna pregunta?
No, por ahora no. Estuvo excelente la presentación y la verdad que muy interesante. No tengo preguntas por ahora.
Qué bueno. De todas maneras, cualquier cosa estamos en contacto después de la presentación. Si tiene alguna cosa, me manda un correo a mí o a Taylor y ahí te podemos ayudar, ¿ok?
Ok, perfecto.
Perfecto.
Gracias.
Gracias. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? It looks like we are at that time to wrap it up. So I'm going to see if nobody's typing anything. Okay, just one final note. If you are interested on discussing pricing, whether it's on the dealer side or if you are on the GC side, masonry side, supplier side, you want to look at pricing, you want to look at strategic partnerships or how you can actually get a mule on your site and in your hands, you can look here in the chat box that everyone can see, and it's public, and you can go ahead and schedule a meeting directly with that link. That link will also be attached to the email that we will be sending out tomorrow, obviously thanking you for your time today, and then also providing the presentation and the recording of today's webinar. So we appreciate all of your time. We hope you have a fantastic rest of the week, and goodbye for now. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Taylor. And thanks everybody for joining us.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.